a justice outcome as well.
Thank you very much. Simon Fell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us. If I can go back to the point you raised, Nicole Jacobs, around strategy. The most recent government strategy for violence against women and girls was published in 2016. I'm interested in your thoughts on that, so how the government is doing against it, and whether that strategy needs refreshing at this point.
Great, thank you. I can tell you the strategy is being refreshed now. The most recent strategy we had ran until 2019, and I do have a few comments, just top line in terms of that there were 95 recommendations within that strategy. There is a document that kind of will give us some picture of the actions that have been taken, but I think, and the government would mark itself as having completed many of those actions. But I think from our recent strategy, very quickly, things that were weaker in terms of implementation that we could do better and focus on more would be, or kind of in my view, unfinished business. Domestic homicide reviews, there were commitments in the last strategy about really implementing lessons learned and more work there. I think we could do much more on that. I've proposed, and I think the government has agreed, more oversight on the part of my office in terms of making sure actions are taken for all sorts of reviews, including homicide reviews. Perpetrator work, I think, remains largely, I mean, there's been some movement ahead and some funding, and that's to be welcomed, but I think we still, and you can see this in the bill debate or the recent Domestic Abuse Act ending debates, we're still not focusing on what works, what is happening in terms of multi-agency responses for early intervention all the way through to much more kind of focus on serial perpetrators. We need to see more concerted effort on what we want to see in those areas. We're doing a lot of piloting of innovation or kind of picking up and putting down some of that, and we could do better there. Stalking was in the last strategy, the stalking protection orders. They've come into place now. We need to see more concerted effort on how those are rolling out, what more support is needed. There's a stalking consortium that we should be listening to very carefully in terms of services about that. Prevention is largely missing, and that goes back to what Yasmin Khan was saying in terms of her priority, which I agree with. Missing in all strategies at the local level. We know this from research that Standing Together has done, asking strategic partnerships at the local level as well. And also in our national strategies, we always mention prevention, but we're not putting a lot of work and effort into prevention. And we must address that going forward. I would say in general for our next strategy, which as you will know has been open for public consultation. We've had it reopened since the Sarah Everard tragic murder, and there's 180 some additional responses from the public coming in to help inform that survey. So I think this is all good news. We need to really weight the specialist sector evidence given to government for this next VOG strategy and domestic abuse strategy. But we really need to address in it some of the things you've heard, the very, very poor criminal justice outcomes. Just to underscore that, in the last 5 years, domestic abuse conviction rates are down some 30%. Sexual violence down 44%. We have really poor conviction rates for so-called honor-based abuse. So we really have to, again, get those fundamentals right and to build that confidence back that others have talked about. We have to, in the VOG strategy, address service funding. We do not have a sustainable service funding system. We have opportunities in the VOG strategy, but also the victims bill coming and a consultation on community-based support. Also, the MOJ is working on a victims funding strategy. These are things that I would really appreciate your help in looking very carefully at over the course of the next year, because unless we get that funding right, we cannot build and innovate and do any prevention, because we're constantly addressing the crisis that is in front of us. So we must be able to address crisis intervention in order to get to prevention. I'll stop there because I know others will have so much to say as well.
Thank you. That's really informative. Yasmin Khan, can I go to you for your perspective from Welsh Assembly Government?
Yeah, I can hopefully provide some context to our strategy, which is currently being refreshed after 5 years. And within that strategy, the Violence Against Women, Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence Act 2015, we had very clear objectives around training, about making local authorities look at the prevention, protection and the support model, making sure that there was a whole campaigns program, and also work with schools and health. And really that knitting of the cross-government department work was very important in terms of the fallout of how that would be implemented at the local level. But I would like to say, in terms of developing priorities for the future, if honour-based abuse or forced marriage is referenced in a small paragraph in a huge strategy, it's very likely that the focus should be will be comparable within local authorities and public bodies too. So we really need to be more investing in the complexities of domestic abuse in all of its forms. And I do feel in any strategy going forward, that is something that we must consider, particularly with the criminal justice system. Honour-based violence, or domestic abuse should be a policing priority. So if it's referenced in a national strategy and work to improve that criminal justice outcome for victims is very, very important. But training is only, if you put training in a strategy, what's really important is what will that training lead to? Will that ensure there's a better identification? And that first response is very, very important. And picking up on the legislation, since 2014, when the forced marriage was a criminal offence, we have had not as many prosecutions as we had anticipated. So there really needs to be a better understanding across the board about those forced marriage, honour-based violence and FGM, because we really need to focus on that in any strategy going forward.
Thank you. Can I just ask Nicole